6 years into retirement, I am grateful for something I never expected to be grateful for. And that is the one conversation I had too late to help someone I care about. I've been retired 6 years now, and in those 6 years I've watched a pattern play out among people I know. Good people, generous people, people who did everything right, where the thing they thought was love turned out to be something quieter and more complicated than that. I watched Carol's brother Dennis give his grandchildren everything they asked for, year after year, until the generosity ran ahead of the math. And I watched him realize when his grandkids were teenagers that he was not sure they actually knew him. Not as a person, as a wallet maybe, as the man who always said yes. But not as a man with a story, with a past, with something worth sitting still for. I'm Gary Mercer. I left a 29-year career in operations management, and some of what I've had to learn in the years since has come from watching people I love make the mistake I almost made. If this is the kind of conversation you've been waiting for someone to have, honestly, without the brochure version of retirement, hit subscribe and turn the bell on. This channel exists for exactly this. And before we go further, I want to ask you something specific. Write one true sentence in the comments about what your retirement has actually been, 10 words or fewer. The first thing that comes to mind is usually the real one. What I'm about to share will change how you think about the most generous thing you can give the people you love. A man I know, 75 years old, sharp as anyone I've ever met, said something to me last spring that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. He said, "I gave my grandkids everything they asked for, and now I need to ask my kids for help." He wasn't complaining. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He was just stating a fact, the way you state a fact when you finally stopped lying to yourself about it. And that's what made it land the way it did. I've been turning that sentence over for 8 months. I've been thinking about all the people I know who are somewhere on that road and don't realize it yet. I've been thinking about the version of that story that doesn't end in a financial crisis, but in something quieter and maybe harder to name. A retirement that got slowly hollowed out by something that felt, every single step of the way, like love. That's what this video is about. Not about being stingy with your grandkids. Not about any of that. It's about a pattern I've watched happen to people I genuinely care about, and a version of it I've had to examine in my own life. It's about the gap between what we think we're doing when we give and give and give, and what we're actually doing. I want to start by saying something that might sound wrong at first, and I want you to sit with it before you decide what you think. Most grandparents who are spending too much on their grandkids don't have a money problem. They have a guilt problem. That's what I've come to believe, and it took me a while to be willing to say it out loud. Think about the people you know who are in this pattern. Think about what they were doing for the 30 years before they retired. They were working. They were traveling for work, staying late at work, thinking about work at dinner, answering emails on weekends. They were present in the technical sense. They came home. They were physically there, but they were also somewhere else a lot of the time. And they knew it. And their kids knew it. Nobody said much about it because that's just how it was. That's just what providing looked like. And then retirement arrives, and suddenly they have time. More time than they know what to do with. And there are grandchildren, and those grandchildren look at them with an openness, a need, an uncomplicated warmth that their own kids never quite had. Because by the time they were really available, their kids were grown and complicated and living their own lives. The grandkids are the second chance. They feel like the chance to get it right this time. I understand that. I feel that pull too. It's real. It's not manufactured. It's not a weakness. It is love, genuinely, running through a channel that got quietly bent by years of absence and by the specific kind of guilt that professional success carries with it. But here is where it goes wrong. When love and guilt are mixed together in the same gesture, the gesture starts to cost more than it should. And in retirement, where the income stopped and the expenses didn't, that extra cost is not abstract. It is real. And it adds up in a way that takes most people completely by surprise, because they were never adding it up. They were just loving their grandchildren, one reasonable gesture at a time. How many of you have bought something for a grandchild this month without really thinking about what you spent? How many have signed up to pay for something, a camp, a class, a trip, and felt a warmth doing it that you also knew, somewhere underneath, had a quiet desperation in it? How many have told yourself that this is what retirement is for, that this is why you saved, that you worked for decades and surely you can do this one thing? I'm not asking to make you feel bad. I'm asking because I think most people in this situation have had exactly that interior conversation, and most people have never heard anyone name it the way it actually sounds. What I've come to see, 6 years into retirement, watching the people around me navigate this, is that the spending itself is rarely the problem at its root. The spending is the symptom. The root is a story people tell themselves about what it means to be a good grandparent. And that story has been quietly written by guilt, by absence, by 30 years of giving money when they couldn't give time, and now trying to reverse the equation without fully examining it. What I'm about to share took me longer than it should have to understand. But once I saw it clearly, I couldn't go back to not seeing it. Carol's brother Dennis retired 3 years before I did. He's a good man, smart, generous, the kind of person who never does anything halfway. He spent 31 years in logistics management, not unlike what I did, honestly, and he retired at 62 with what I would have called a solid setup. He and his wife Carolyn had a nice house in the suburbs of Cincinnati, a pension, savings. He wasn't rich, but he wasn't worried. He had done what you're supposed to do. He and Carolyn started watching their grandkids a couple of times a week after he retired. Their daughter needed the help, and they were glad to do it. That was fine. That was actually good. Dennis told me he loved it. He said it gave his week a shape it had been missing since he'd left work. Tuesdays and Thursdays, the grandkids came. He picked them up from school. Carolyn made dinner. It was, by his own description, the best part of his retirement in those early months. But somewhere in there, the watching became a kind of infrastructure. And alongside the watching, the giving started. It wasn't dramatic. That's what I want you to understand. It was never dramatic. It was a birthday gift that was a little more than they'd planned. Then holiday gifts for 3 grandchildren who all needed different things, and none of the things were cheap. Then a school trip for the oldest one. $200 that Dennis wrote the check for without blinking, because his granddaughter's face when she found out she was going. That face. That's what got him every time, he told me later. That face. Then summer camp for the middle one, because the day camp near their house had gotten expensive and Dennis and Carolyn said they'd cover it. Then school clothes, because their daughter was going through a rough patch at work, and Dennis didn't want the kids to feel it. Then a phone for the teenager, because everyone at school had one, and Dennis remembered what it felt like to be the kid who didn't have the thing. Each one made sense. I want to be very clear about that. Not one of those individual decisions was irresponsible or wrong on its face. A grandparent helping with school clothes when their kid is struggling, that's not a character flaw. That's family. That's what families do when they can. And Dennis could, for a while. The problem wasn't any individual decision. The problem was that the decisions were never being weighed against each other. They were being weighed against the face, against the feeling, against the version of himself he was building, one generous gesture at a time. But the total. Nobody was watching the total. I asked Dennis about it once, maybe 2 years after he'd retired, when Carol had mentioned to me that things seemed to be getting tight for them. I didn't ask directly about money. That's not something I would do with a person I respect. I just asked him how it was going, really going, and I listened. And what he said was this. Every individual thing felt like the right call in the moment. He said he was never making a reckless decision. He was just making a lot of careful decisions back to back for years, without ever stopping to look at what they added up to. It was only when you put them all together that you saw what had happened. He used a comparison I haven't forgotten. He said it was like eating at a restaurant where you keep ordering one more thing, and you're not thinking about the bill because you're enjoying the meal, and then the bill comes. I thought about that for a long time, because the bill in retirement doesn't come from a waiter. It comes slowly, over years, in the form of a margin that gets thinner and thinner, until one unexpected thing, a car repair, a medical bill, an HVAC unit that gives out in August, lands on a foundation that can't hold it anymore. And by then, the grandkids are teenagers, and the birthday toys are in a closet somewhere, and the summer camps are a vague memory. And Dennis and Carolyn are having a conversation they never expected to have about what they can and can't do in the years ahead. I'm not sharing that story to frighten anyone. I'm sharing it because it is the most common version of this story that I've seen. Not the dramatic version, not the reckless version, the gentle, loving, completely understandable version, where every step felt like the right thing to do. And it is the one that nobody seems to talk about until after it has already happened. What I took from watching Dennis was something I've had to examine in my own life too, not to the same degree. Carol and I have talked about this more explicitly than Dennis ever did, which has helped. But the pull is there for me too. There's a specific kind of pleasure in giving your grandkids something they want. It is genuinely one of the warmer feelings retirement has to offer, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. The pleasure is real. But pleasure and wisdom are not always pointing in the same direction. And retirement is long enough that the direction matters. I want to talk about the thing underneath the spending, the thing that actually drives it, because I think most people, if they're honest, can feel it, even if they haven't named it. There's a particular kind of grandparent, and I've seen this in my neighborhood, in my circle of former colleagues, in Carol's family, who overgives not because they are naive about money, but because they are settling an old score. The score is not financial, the score is emotional. It is the score they kept during the working years, the tally of missed soccer games and school plays and ordinary Tuesday evenings when they were on the road or in the office or just too exhausted to be fully present. And their kids grew up in the margin of their availability. Nobody planned that. Nobody wanted it. It's just what the career years looked like for a lot of people who were doing the right thing as they understood it at the time. Providing, building, securing the future. And the future arrived, and the kids are grown, and now here are the grandkids. And somewhere in the nervous system, in the place that keeps score without asking permission, there is a voice that says, "This time, be there. This time, give everything. This time, make sure nobody goes without." And that voice is not cruel. It is not petty. It comes from love, genuinely. But it is also the voice of guilt trying to pay a debt in the wrong currency. I had a conversation about this with my friend Dave. We have lunch every couple of weeks, have for years. He retired about 18 months before I did. And he said something I've thought about a lot since. He said the thing that trips people up is that giving money to grandkids feels like being present. It mimics presence. It produces the same warmth, the same grateful faces, the same sense that you are in the center of their world. But it isn't presence. It's a substitute for presence. And a very expensive one that also, over time, teaches the wrong lesson about what love looks like. Dave told me about his own father that day. His dad grew up during the Depression, never had much, worked in a foundry for most of his life. Not the kind of man who bought things easily because things had always cost more than they should. Dave's kids grew up knowing their grandpa was not going to show up with extravagant gifts. That was just understood. What he showed up with was himself. Dave said his dad would sit on the back porch with the grandkids for hours. No agenda, no plan. If they wanted to talk, they talked. If they wanted to be quiet and watch the yard, they did that. He taught Dave's son how to sharpen a knife. He taught Dave's daughter to play cribbage. He told them stories about the neighborhood he grew up in, about working the line, about the winter his family couldn't heat the house and what they did instead. He was, by any measure, a man who gave his grandchildren almost nothing in the way of material things. Dave asked his daughter once, when she was in her 30s, what she remembered most about her grandpa. She thought about it for a moment, and then she said, "He always had time." She said, "Whenever we showed up, he acted like we were the thing he'd been waiting for all day." That was how she described him. He acted like we were the thing he'd been waiting for all day. Dave said he got quiet when she said that, because there it was, the whole thing, in one sentence. Not the knife sharpening, not the cribbage, the feeling that you were wanted, that your presence, on an ordinary afternoon, was enough reason for joy. That nobody needed an occasion, nobody needed an event, nobody needed to have brought anything. That's the inheritance. That's the thing Dave's kids carry from their grandfather, and Dave knows it, and it changed how he has approached his own grandparenting. In the spring of my second year of retirement, my granddaughter came to stay for a few days. She was 8. She's 11 now, so this was a few years back. I didn't have anything grand planned. We ended up in the garage. She wanted to see what I was working on, and I was in the middle of making a small cabinet. Nothing fancy, just learning the joinery. The joints weren't even right. I was still figuring it out. She asked if she could help. I handed her a small hand plane and showed her how to hold it, how to lean into it, how to read what the wood was telling you about the direction of the grain. She's 8 years old, so most of what I was saying went over her head, but she tried. She put her weight behind the plane and pushed, and the first long curl of wood came off the surface, and she looked up at me like I'd shown her a magic trick. We spent about 2 hours on a single board. She did not, by any objective measure, improve the board. By the time we were done, what had been a reasonable piece of stock was a somewhat thinner and vaguely wavy piece of stock with a lot of character. But she stayed with it. She asked questions the whole time. She wanted to know why the grain mattered, what the shavings meant, whether the wood could feel anything. She asked me whether the tree knew when it was being cut down. I didn't have a good answer to that one. I spent maybe $4 on sandpaper that afternoon. I still have the board. It's on a shelf in the garage because I couldn't bring myself to use it for anything. It's got too much of that afternoon on it. And her mother told me recently that she still talks about it. At 11, she still mentions the afternoon in Grandpa's garage when we made the thing with the hand plane. I thought about Dennis when I heard that. I thought about all the things Dennis had bought over the years, things his grandkids have probably lost track of, things that were wanted intensely and then forgotten in the ordinary way that children forget things. And I thought about 2 hours in a garage with a hand plane and $4 of sandpaper and a board that got worse instead of better. And I knew, as clearly as I've known anything, which of those grandchildren was going to remember their grandfather when he was gone. That is not a financial argument. I want to be clear about that. I am not telling you to stop buying birthday presents. I'm telling you that the thing driving the overspending in most families I've watched is not a desire to give things. It is a desire to matter, to be remembered, to make up for something. And none of those needs, as real and human as they are, can be met by a gift card or a summer camp check or a bike that will be outgrown in a year. The need to matter to the people you love is one of the deepest needs in retirement. I've said that in other videos, and I'll say it again because I think it is genuinely at the center of most of what goes wrong in the first years of this transition. Work met that need for decades, imperfectly, expensively, in ways that cost relationships, but it met it. And then work ended, and the need didn't. What I've watched people do, over and over, is try to meet that need through generosity, through giving, through being the grandparent who always says yes. And the tragedy, I don't use that word lightly, the tragedy is that it works in the short term. It works for years sometimes. The grandkids love coming over. The adult children appreciate the help. The grandparent feels needed, feels useful, feels like they are making a genuine difference in the lives of people they love. It works, until it doesn't. Dennis called me last fall. I hadn't talked to him in a few months. He didn't call to talk about money. That wasn't the conversation on the surface. But it came up, the way it comes up when the pressure is real. His grandkids are teenagers now. The oldest has a driver's license. They don't come over the way they used to. Teenagers don't. That's just the way of it. That's not anyone's fault. Dennis said something toward the end of the call that I've been sitting with ever since. He said, I spent all those years giving them things, and I thought that was the investment. I thought that was how I'd know they knew I loved them. And now they're 15 and 17, and I realize, he paused here, and when he came back his voice was different. I realize I'm not sure they know me. Not really. Not the way you know a person. I gave them so much stuff. I don't think I ever really just sat with them. I want you to sit with that. I mean that genuinely. I want you to stop for just a moment and sit with what Dennis said. He gave them so much. He was, by any external measure, a generous grandfather. He would have told you 5 years ago that his relationship with his grandkids was one of the best parts of his retirement. And now he is 71 years old and his grandkids are teenagers, and he realizes that what he bought was access, not closeness. Presence at events, not presence in their lives. And the account he drew down to buy that access is thinner now than it should be. And the closeness he was trying to purchase was never for sale in the first place. That is the thing nobody tells you. That is the thing I did not hear, before I retired, from anyone. You can spend generously on your grandchildren and still end up feeling like a stranger to them. Because money and time are not the same currency. Love and guilt are not the same thing, even when they wear the same face. And retirement is too long and too precious to build on a foundation that was always going to shift. The grandparent they will remember is not the one who bought the most. It is the one who had time and who used it to know them, who sat with them when there was nothing to do, who told them stories about their parents when their parents were young, who let them come into the garage or the kitchen or the garden and just be there, learning what you know, absorbing who you are. That costs nothing. That is, in fact, the one thing retirement makes possible for the first time in 30 years. They won't remember what you bought them. They'll remember whether you were there. I've said that sentence to myself more than once in the past 6 years. I've said it when I felt the pull to solve something with a check. I've said it when I caught myself thinking that buying the thing was the same as showing up for the thing. It helps. Not every time, but it helps. Before the end of this week, I want you to think about one thing you were planning to give a grandchild, or one ongoing financial commitment you've taken on without fully examining it, and ask yourself one honest question. If you had half as much money, what would you give them instead? Don't answer quickly. Sit with it. Because in my experience, and in the experience of people I know who have been through this and come out wiser, the answer that comes up is almost never another thing. It is almost always time. It is almost always presence. It is almost always some version of, I would just be with them. That answer has been available to you since the day you retired. It costs exactly nothing. And it is the thing above all others that they will carry with them when you are gone. I want to know something from you, and I mean this as a genuine question, not a prompt. If you are a grandparent, tell me in the comments. What is the one thing you've given a grandchild that you know they will actually remember? Not the most expensive thing, not the biggest thing, the thing that stuck. Because I've heard enough of these stories now to know that the answers are remarkably consistent. And I think hearing them from each other, in this community, does something that I alone cannot do from this garage. Write it down, whatever it is. The first thing that comes to mind is usually the true one. If what was said today found something in you that you recognized, the pull, the guilt underneath the giving, the slow arithmetic of generosity that nobody does until it starts to matter, I'd be glad if you subscribed. They won't remember what you bought them. They'll remember whether you were there. That sentence is the one I hope you take from today. If it meant something, stay. The bell is there if you want it. I'll keep showing up. Go be with somebody today. That's the whole thing. Go be with somebody.